Alright, welcome to video 3 for AP Chemistry. We are actually going to be covering two different topics today in this video. So once again, we are still in Unit 1, Atomic Structure and Properties, but like I said, two different topics today, so this is going to be 1.3 and 1.4 combined. Topic 3 is over the elemental composition of pure substances, and topic 4 is over the composition of mixtures. Now, you hopefully remember from last year in your first year chemistry class that all matter, right, and chemistry is the study of matter, all matter can be broken down into one of two categories. It can either be a pure substance or it can be a mixture. So today what we're going to be looking at are some specific ways that you can sort of calculate or represent the compositions of pure substances and mixtures based on what they're made of. Okay, a lot of this is not going to be review. I know in my class last year we did not do much of this at all. If you had another teacher, it's possible that you did get into this, but it's something that we all need to know. So without further ado, let's go take a look at the learning objectives. So once again, this is for two different topics. So for 1.3 pure substances, it says that we need to be able to explain the quantitative relationship between the elemental composition by mass and the empirical formula of a pure substance. Okay, so we're going to be talking about mass percentages and empirical formulas here in just a minute. And then for 1.4, we need to be able to explain the quantitative relationship between the elemental composition by mass and the composition of substances in a mixture. So these basically say the same thing. One's talking about pure substances, the other is talking about mixtures. Okay, so table of contents for today. The slides that I'm going to go over, two topics. We're going to talk about mass percent compositions of compounds, or mass percentages. That's from Chapter 3, Section 6 in your textbook. And then we are also going to be talking about empirical and molecular or chemical formulas, and that is in Chapter 3, Section 7 of your textbook. Later in the second video, the problem-solving video, I'll be showing you guys how to calculate mass percent compositions or mass percentages, and how to determine empirical and molecular formulas using data. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into it. So, mass percentages. There are two common ways of describing the composition of a compound. Okay, the way that we're all familiar with is just knowing the number of the constituent atoms. So this is just like having a chemical formula, right? Like H2O or NaCl. This chemical formula here tells us that water is made of 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. This chemical formula here tells us that sodium chloride is made of 1 sodium, 1 chlorine. So that's the first way. The second way, and this is going to be new for many of you, is calculating the mass percentage, okay, of the elements in the compound. Okay, so this right here doesn't tell us anything about the mass of hydrogen versus the mass of oxygen, or the mass of sodium versus the mass of chlorine. That is what mass percentages do. Okay, the mass percent, or sometimes called the weight percent, I'm always going to refer to it as the mass percent. The mass percent of any element in a compound is the proportion by mass of that element in comparison to the mass of the compound as a whole. Okay, it's actually pretty darn simple. Okay, so mass percentages are really not that difficult. Let's take ethanol, for example. So here is the chemical formula, or the molecular formula for ethanol, C2H5OH. Remember that you can always write this in a slightly different way, C2H6O. This is just written in the way that makes sure that you know that this is an alcohol, okay, the OH group there. We'll talk much more about that type of thing later on in the course. Anyways, generally, when we're doing mass percentage problems, we're going to assume that we're dealing with 1 mole of any given of the substance. Okay, the specific value of 1 mole is not important. Okay, so we could use like 0.5 or 2 moles. It doesn't really matter. But using 1 mole makes the math simple and easy. Okay, So anytime we're considering a compound, ethanol or anything else, we're always going to consider, we're always going to assume that we're dealing with just 1 mole of the substance. Okay, and that's going to make the math a little bit simpler and easier for us. Okay, if you used other values, the final answers that you get would be the same. Okay, all right. So let's assume that we have 1 mole of ethanol. That means that we have 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd molecules of ethanol. The question is, first, that we need to ask ourselves is, how much would that sample weigh? Okay, what's the overall mass of this compound? That is important because if I go back here to the definition of a mass percent or a mass percentage, one of the things we need to know is the mass of the compound as a whole. Okay, so we're going to be comparing the mass of any one element in a substance to the mass of the compound as a whole. So the first thing we need to do is we need to calculate the overall mass of 1 mole of ethanol. Okay, this is exactly what we did in the first day, or the first video, the first lesson. If we know that we have 1 mole of a substance, we can use the molar mass to figure out the mass of that 1 mole. Okay, molar masses are in units of grams per mole, right? They tell us how much 1 mole of a substance weighs in grams. So the process for that, just to remind you, our formula here, right? We have 2 carbons, 6 hydrogens, and 1 oxygen. So if we add up the masses for 2 carbons, 6 hydrogens, and 1 oxygen, we would get an overall molar mass of 46.07 grams per mole. Okay, and you can find some more specific details of this calculation in your book on page 81. What that would mean then, right, because we are working with 1 mole, the mass of this amount of ethanol would weigh 46.07 grams. Okay? So, we have 46.07 grams of ethanol. Now let's say we wanted to know the mass percent of each individual element, okay, in ethanol. So the question that we might be asking is, what percent by mass of ethanol is carbon, or is hydrogen, or is oxygen? These are the types of questions that we're going to be learning how to answer here through these calculations. So by dividing the molar mass, or really the, well, we'll stick with that term. By dividing the molar masses of each individual element found in ethanol by the overall molar mass in ethanol, we can obtain these mass percentages. Okay, and obviously you're going to have to multiply by 100% as a part of the calculation, but we'll get to that in just a moment. So I am not going to go through the math in this video, okay, because this is just supposed to be covering sort of the notes, like the content, the ideas. In the problem-solving portion of the video, I will be doing a full example of how to calculate mass percentages, okay? And you can look up the specific details of this calculation in page 82 on your book, okay? So 81, 82 goes through the calculation, all right? The mass percentages that we get for ethanol, okay, carbon makes up 52.14%, hydrogen makes up 13.13%, and oxygen makes up 34.73%. Okay, and that's a little interesting, okay, because if we go back here and look at the compound, it appears to be mostly hydrogen, right? There's 6 hydrogens. The way that this makes sense, though, is because hydrogens are so small, because they have such a small amount of mass, the mass percentage of hydrogen, even though there are 6 hydrogens in the compound, is very small. Okay, we have 2 carbons, which are of sort of moderate size. Those end up composing a majority of the compound by mass. And then the 1 oxygen atom, the 1 oxygen atom here, because oxygen is the largest element in the compound, just 1 atom makes up about a third, or 34.73% of the compound. Okay? Your mass percentages, whenever you do a calculation or calculations like this, your mass percentages should always add up to 100%. Okay, and depending on whether or not you've had to do any rounding, you might be off by 0.01 or 0.02. In that situation, that's not a huge deal, but you can use this rule to check your work right after you do some calculations. If you get mass percentages and you add them up and you get like 200% or 50%, that is a major indication that you have done something wrong for sure. Okay, and you're going to want to go back and check your work to see where you might have made a mistake. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to be doing a full example of how to do mass percentages in the next video. All right, now this part is going to be a bit involved, a bit complicated, and I'll be honest with you, I still get myself a little bit confused whenever I do problems like what we're about to talk about myself. So I'm going to do my best here to walk you guys through the theory, the idea, and then, like I said, in the problem-solving video, we'll actually be doing some math with this topic here. So what am I talking about? So let's say you're in the lab and you have synthesized a new compound. Okay, so you know that some sort of chemical reaction took place, which means that a new compound was formed, but you're not sure what the new compound was or what the new compound is. Okay, so this could be like a situation in real life, right? Like let's say you work at a pharmaceutical company and you think that you know what you're doing. You think you're trying to make some certain chemical. You've witnessed a chemical reaction take place, and now you want to verify or explore what exactly the new substance is that you have created, right? So this is definitely some real life chemistry here. So by analyzing the masses of each element in your new compound, okay, so by doing that mass percentage business that we just discussed, you can determine the empirical formula for your compound. Okay, we don't know what this is yet, okay, but just take my word for it. I'm going to talk about it on the next slide. Okay, so using mass percentage information, you can calculate formulas for compounds that you may have encountered. Okay, so what is an empirical formula? All right, and this is really important, guys, because I guarantee you this is going to show up on the AP exam like 100%. Okay, empirical formulas. So the empirical formula of a compound is the formula of that compound with the smallest whole number ratios for each element in the compound. Okay, and I have a nice little example here that should make that pretty clear. All right, so glucose has the chemical formula or the molecular formula of C6H12O6. All right, this is the sugar that your body uses to conduct cellular respiration, right? So this is the chemical formula of glucose, also known as the molecular formula of glucose. We know this, okay? The carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms in glucose are present in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. Okay, everybody see that? 6 to 12 to 6. You could sort of simplify that down to say 1 to 2 to 1. Okay? So 1 to 2 to 1 is the smallest whole number ratio of each element in glucose. Okay? Therefore, the empirical formula, so not the chemical formula, all right? Empirical and chemical formulas are distinct and different things. The empirical formula for glucose would be this, CH2O, right? 1 to 2 to 1. All right, that is what an empirical formula is. So once again, it is the smallest whole number ratios for each element in the compound. Okay, empirical formulas and then chemical formulas are distinct and different ideas. Okay, the chemical formula is what the compound actually is. Empirical formulas just give you information on the ratios of elements in the compound. All right. Now, it turns out that several compounds can have the same empirical formula. Okay, so for example, formaldehyde. It has the chemical formula and the empirical formula of CH2O. Okay, so this is actually what formaldehyde is, CH2O. That's its chemical formula. And then that means that it also has the empirical formula of CH2O. Okay, acetic acid or ethanoic acid has the chemical formula C2H4O2. Okay, which corresponds to an empirical formula of CH2O. And there are probably other examples, okay, of things that have the same empirical formula but have different actual chemical formulas, okay? So only knowing a compound's empirical formula cannot by itself tell you the chemical formula for the compound. You need more information, okay? So if a question asked you, you have the compound's empirical formula and that's all you know, can you figure out the chemical formula? The answer is no. You have to have more information, okay? So if you know a compound's empirical formula and, okay, so this is the other piece of information that you need, and its molar mass, okay, you can use both those pieces of information to determine the chemical or the compound's chemical formula, its actual chemical or molecular formula, okay? First thing, you need to calculate the molar mass of the empirical formula, okay? So once again, we know what the empirical formula is and we know the molar mass of the overall compound. So the first thing we need to do is calculate the molar mass of the empirical formula, right? And then we're just going to divide, okay? We're going to take the big molar mass of the compound and we're going to divide it by the empirical formula's molar mass, okay? This is going to give you a whole number or close to a whole number, very close to a whole number. That whole number is how many empirical formula units compose the compound's true chemical formula, okay? And I have an example of this here on the next slide. Let's talk about glucose again, all right? So let's pretend that we don't know what the true chemical formula is for glucose, right? It's C6H12O6, but let's just pretend we don't know that, all right? What we do know, okay, our starting information is this. We know that the empirical formula is CH2O, and we know that we have a compound that has a molar mass of this, 180.16 grams per mole. Okay, so this is kind of like a question that you're going to see later down the line in the problem set for this, the problem set for this section. So what we need to do is we need to take this overall molar mass and divide it by the molar mass for the empirical formula. Okay, that's going to give us, like I said, a whole number or very close to a whole number, and then we can take this empirical formula, multiply it by that whole number, and that will be the actual chemical formula. Okay, hopefully you guys are following along all right. So what is the molar mass of that empirical formula? 1 carbon plus 2 hydrogens plus 1 oxygen, you get 30.03 grams per mole. Okay, so let's do that division, right? Let's divide the molar mass of glucose by the molar mass of one empirical formula unit, 180.16 divided by 30.03. We get approximately 6. I believe the number is actually like 5.999 something, okay? So we get approximately 6, all right? And that's okay. Due to some rounding issues, you know, a lot of times what happens in chemistry is you end up with numbers like this where it's not exactly 6, but we sort of have to have the knowledge and the intuition to understand that this number being basically 6 is good enough, okay, for empirical formulas. Okay, so this means that the glucose is actually made of 6 units of the empirical formula. Okay, 6 of these go into glucose to make a molar mass that is this big. All right. So in other words, we can multiply the empirical formula by 6 to obtain the true chemical formula. All right. And if that thing at the bottom of my screen will go away, there we go. We see that the formula of glucose must be C6H12O6. Okay. So now, calculating or determining the empirical formula in the first place is its own type of chore, okay? And that is also something that we need to do. However, I'm going to save that entirely for the problem-solving video, okay? For now, I just wanted you to sort of get walked through the thought process, okay? And so it's totally okay if you need to go back, after we've talked about this in class a little bit, if you need to go back and watch this video again, that may be a good idea, okay, to sort of try to walk yourself through, okay, what is it that I'm doing, right? Not necessarily what math am I punching in, what calculations am I doing, but what is the concept, right? What am I trying to accomplish here? That is going to help you a lot as you move forward with these problems. Okay, and then on into the rest of the course, obviously. Okay, so that's it for this first video. The problem solving video is probably going to be a bit lengthy. So this one's only about 20 minutes, which is not too bad. But the next one will probably be a bit more lengthy. So make sure you've got some time to dedicate to it, and that you can follow along with some notes of your own. All right, thanks a lot, and I'll see you in the next video.